Opportunity cost. Opportunity cost of any decision is the value of the next best alternative that the decision forces the decision maker to forego. Example is a student spends 3 hours and $20 at the movies the night before an exam. The opportunity cost is the time spent studying and the money to spend on something else. Backfire. Backfire is to attempt to fight market forces often. Example is they intended to enter the market to take advantage of our tragedy, but found that raising that issue backfire on them at home. The last time he did, it backfired in his face. A car draws into a road checkpoint and as it is leaving, it backfires. Comparative advantage. Nations can gain from trade by exploiting their example. In an economic model, agents have a comparative advantage over others in producing a particular good if they can produce that good at a lower relative opportunity cost or autocracy price at a lower relative marginal cost prior to trade. Voluntary exchange. Both prices can gain in a voluntary exchange. Example is a type of transaction where two parties fairly trade goods or services. This occurs in a market economy, which is a type of economy where both participants have an interaction gain a mutual benefit from it and are better off than when they are started. Decision. Good typically require marginal analysis. Example is one that is made deliberately and thoughtfully, consider and includes allowed relevant factors, is consistent with the individual's philosophy and values, and can be explained clearly to significant others. Externalities may cause the market mechanism to malfunction, but this defect can often be repaired by market methods. Example, were once the responsibility of local governments and those affected by them. For instance, municipalities were responsible for paying for the effects of pollution from a factory in the area, while the residents were responsible for their healthcare costs as a result of the pollution. There is a trade-off between efficiency and equality. Example is defined as an opportunity cost. For example, you might take a day of work to go to a concert, gaining the opportunity of seeing your favorite band, while losing a day's wage as the cost for that opportunity. Correlation need not imply causations. Example, like demand and price, consumer spending, and GDP are examples of positively correlated variables where movement by one variable causes movement by the other. In this case, consumer spending is the variable that affects a change in GDP. Theory is a deliberate simplification of relationships used to explain how those relationships works. Example, the theory of consumers demand relates goods and services consumption, preference to consumption, expenditure. Such a correlation provides a way for consumers subject to budget constraints to achieve a balance between expenses and preferences by optimizing utility. Resources are the instruments provided by nature or by people that are used to create goods and services. Example, a stock or supply of money, materials, stock, and other assets that can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function effectively. Outputs of a firm or an economy are the goods and services it produces. Example, for an industry, output is a measure of all the goods and service produced in a given time period by businesses in that industry and sold either to consumers or to businesses outside the industry. Inputs. used by a firm or an economy are the labor, raw materials, electricity, and resources. Example, inputs are any resources used to create goods and services. Example of inputs include labor, fuel, materials, buildings, and equipment. Production possibilities fertile, a curve that shows the maximum quantity output. Example, a production possibility fertile, production possibility curve, or production possibility boundary, or transformation curve boundary fertile is the curve which shows various combinations of the amounts. Scarcity, unlimited ones but limited resources. Example, scarcity in economics refers to when the demand for a resource is greater than the supply of that resources, as resources are limited. Allocation of scarce resources refers to society's decisions on how to divide its scarce input resources. Example, one lotteries, markets, barter, rationing, and distribution of income are all methods commonly used to allocate scarce resources. Efficiency is the absence of waste. Example, the factory was operating at peak efficiency. A furnace with 80% fuel efficiency wastes 20% of its fuel. The company is trying to lower costs and improve efficiencies. Division of labor means breaking up a task into a number of smaller, more specialized tasks. Example is the assembly line present in the most manufacturing facilities. Each person has a task they complete on an assembly line before the product moves to the next station. The person at each station completes one task repeatedly and the product moves between situations. Optimal decision is the one that best serves the objects of the decision maker. Example, if the extra benefits are bigger than the extra cost, you shall go ahead with the decision, namely the decision is good. Absolute advantage. Productive in performing tasks, a producer has an absolute advantage if it can produce efficiently using the same resources compared to the competitors. Example, absolute advantage is the ability of an entity to produce a product or service at a lower absolute cost per unit using a smaller number of inputs or a more efficient process than other entity producing the same good or services. Comparative advantage. The ability to a producer to produce a good or service for a lower opportunity cost than a competitor. Example, if a country is skilled at making both cheese and chocolate, they may determine how much labor goes into producing each good. If it takes 1 hour of labor to produce 10 units of cheese and one of the labor to produce 20 units of chocolate, then this country has a comparative advantage in making chocolate. Market system is a form of economic organization in which resources allocation decisions are left to individual producers and consumers acting in their own best interest without central direction. Example, simple exchanges of goods or services such as laborers, earnings wage, smallholder farmers selling crops, or holding buying domestic commodities lie at the heart of market system.
Invisible hand. Invisible hand is a phrase used by Adam Smith to describe how, by pursuing their own self-interest. Example of the invisible hand, the successful farmers introduced better equipment and techniques and brought to market only those goods for which consumers were willing to pay. He showed that returns were far higher when competing self-interest ran the estate rather than the previous landlord's command economy. Next is quantity demand. Quantity demand is the number of units of a good of good that consumers are willing and can afford to but over a specified period of time. Example of quantity demand. Say for example at the price of $5 per hot dog. Consumers buy 2 hot dogs per day. The quantity demand is 2. If vendors decide to increase the price of hot dog to $6, then the consumers only purchase 1 hot dog per day. Number 3, demand schedule. Demand schedule is the table showing how the quantity demanded of some product during a specified period of time changes as the price of that product changes. An example of this in every life could be frozen pizzas. If the price of a frozen pizza drops just 25%, you might buy 3 times as much as you normally would only unit grocery trip. 4. Normal goods. Normal goods are commodities whose quantity demand rises when the purchaser real income rises, all other things remaining equal. Example of normal goods include food staples, clothing, and household appliances. Number 5. Inferior goods. Inferior goods are commodities whose quantity demand falls when the purchaser real income rises, all the things remaining equal. Typically, example of inferior goods include store brand grocery products, instant noodles, and certain canned or frozen food. Although some people have a specific preference for these items, most buyers would prefer buying more expensive alternatives if they had the income to do so. Supply. Quantity supplied is the number of units that seller wants to sell over a specific period of time. The general idea of quantity supply relates to the law of supply. The law of supply states the supply increase as price increases. For example, if the price of grapes increases, then the quantity supplied of grapes would likely increase as well. 7. Supply schedule. Supply schedule. Supply schedule are tables showing how the quantity supplied of some products change as the price of those products change during specified period of time. When the price of the commodity is 100, firm A supplies 1,000 units, while the firm B supplies 3,000 units. Thus, the market supply is 4,000 units. Similarly, when its price is 500, firm A supplies 5,000 units while firm B supplies 7,000 units. Thus, its market demand increased to 12,000 units. 8. Supply curve. Supply curve is a graphical depiction of a supply schedule. If a 50% rise in soybean prices causes the number of soybeans produced to rise by 50%, the supply elasticity of soybeans is 1. On the other hand, if a 50% rise in soybean prices only increases the quantity supplied by 10%, the supply elasticity is 0.2. Shortage. Shortage is an excess of quantity demand over quantity supply. Example of shortage include food, water, power, and labor. Demand or supply changes can occur for various reasons. Not all are related to price change. Scarcity and shortage are two different. Uncertain economic shortage characteristics make them stand apart. Number 10. Surplus. Surplus is an excess of quantity supply over quantity demand. A surplus is when you have more of something than you need to plan to use. For example, when you cook a meal. If you have food remaining after everyone has eaten, you have a surplus of food. Equilibrium. Equilibrium is a situation in which there are no inherent forces that produce changes. The market for coffee is in equilibrium. Unless the demand or supply curve shift, there will be no tendency for price to change. The equilibrium price in any market is the price at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. The equilibrium price in the market for coffee is close $6 per pound. Number 12, speculation. Speculation is buying a storable commodity with the goal of being able to sell for more at a later date. Speculators trade based on their educated guesses on where they believe the market is headed. For example, if a speculator thinks that a stock is overpriced, they may sell short the stock and wait for the price to decline, at which point it can be bought back for a profit. Number 13, price selling. Price selling are the maximum that the price charged for a commodity cannot legally exceed. What are price selling examples? Rent control, which limit how much landlords can charge monthly for residences, and often by how much they can increase rents. Are an example of price selling, caps on the cost of prescription drugs and lab tests are another example of a common price selling. Number 14, price floor. Price floor are legal minimum below which the prices charged for a commodity are not permitted to fall. A price floor is the lowest legal price that can be paid in a market for a good and services. Labor or financial capital, perhaps the best known example of a price floor is the minimum wage, which is based on the normative view that someone working full time though to be able to afford a basic standard of living.
This video showing making and solving the graph that we make. And next is explaining about flow diagram. Circular flow diagram is a visual model of the economy that shows how dollars flows through markets among households and firms. Firms produce goods and services using inputs such as labor, land and capital, buildings and machines. These inputs are called the factor of production. Households own the factor of production and consume all the goods and services that the firms produce. Households and firms interact in two types of market. In the market for goods and services, households are buyers and firms are sellers. In particular, households buy the output of goods and services that firms produce. In the market for the factors of production, households are sellers and firms are buyers. In these markets, household provides firms the inputs that the firms use to produce goods and services. The circular flow diagram offers a simple way of organizing all the economic transactions that occur between household and firms in the economy. The inner loop of the circular flow diagram represents the flows of goods and services between household and firms. The households sell the use of their labor, land, and capital to the firm in the markets for the factors of production. The firms then use these factors to produce goods and services, which in turn are sold to households in the markets for goods and services. Hence, the factor of production flow from household to firms and goods and services flows from firms to household. The outer loop of the circular flow diagram represents the corresponding flow of dollars. The household spend money to buy goods and services from the firms. The firms use some of the revenue from these sales to pay for the factors or production, such as the wages of their workers. What's left is the profit of the firm owners, who themselves are members of the household. Hence, spending on goods and services flows from household to firms, and income in the form of wages, rent, profit flows from firms to household. The example of circular flow diagram is, let's take a tour of the circular flow by following a dollar bill as it makes its way from person to person through the economy. Imagine that the dollar begins at a household sitting in say your wallet. If you want to buy a cup of coffee, you take the dollar to one of the economy's markets for goods and services such as your local Starbucks coffee shop. That's all. Thank you.
No, you're not